All right, so let's hop into what's different. I broke this up into 3 sections, some of the minor differences, some of the medium differences, and then what are the major differences from a DFS perspective of what to be thinking about when you're constructing your lineups versus the game flow of the CFL game versus the NFL. So let's start with some of the smaller differences. So the big thing here is, some of this stuff at the top is just no-brainer stuff. It's not that important. But there's 9 teams in the CFL versus the 32 in the NFL. The CFL goes 21 weeks. So typically what they'll do is there will be 4 games a week with 1 team getting a bye, and then they'll just cycle every single week. 4 teams on, 1 team off, and I think it works out to every team playing 18 games, getting 3 weeks off. It might be more than that with the time off because I think there's actually some weeks where there's only 3 games. But typically the structure of the season is opening game on a Thursday like the NFL, and then there's typically maybe a game on Friday, maybe 2 on Saturday, maybe Thursday, Friday, and 2 on Sunday, or 1 Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes it's on a Tuesday. So you just got to pay attention to when the schedule comes out. But you have the opportunity, there'll be 1 game on Thursday, and then the other 3 games will follow up the rest of the weekend. So similar to the NFL, just, kind of everything that the NFL does, the CFL kind of does it on a little bit of a smaller scale. In the CFL, there's 45-man rosters versus the 53 in the NFL, and 21 of them have to be so you might hear the announcers say that 21 of the players on the team have to be nationals, and that's basically a Canadian citizen. Just under half of the team has to be from Canada or a Canadian citizen at the time that they sign their contract. And then of the starters of each game, 7 have to be Canadian. And I think that there is a minimum of Canadian players that have to be on the field at all times. That might not be correct. I might be incorrect with that, but they have to have at least 7 national players, 7 Canadian players in the starting lineup. So one of the things that's a little bit different is with the inactives. The NFL will release the NFL's rule is they have to release anybody that's out 90 minutes before kickoff. So you don't have a ton of time to adjust your lineups. The cool thing about the CFL is the depth charts come out the day before. So if anybody is dinged up and questionable, if they're not on the final depth chart the day before the game, they're not playing. So it's easy to have to stay on top of that. And it's also nice too for your roster construction. It's a little bit more forgiving if you have a good feeling about a questionable player and then he ends up not being in, then you can go ahead and swap him out. It's also really nice because the games are spread out over a few days, that if your lineup isn't very good, or if you have guys that are duds in the opening game, you can start swapping them out for some higher upside guys in the later games. We're not going to really get into that. That's kind of a more advanced thing, and I don't really want to overwhelm you guys. But if you're familiar with how that works in the NFL, it's pretty similar here with the CFL in terms of utilizing late swap. The flags, the colors are reversed. So in the NFL, a penalty flag is yellow, challenge flag is red. It's the complete opposite in the CFL. The penalty flags are red and the challenges are yellow. Penalties can be challenged. A big one that you'll see, I don't know if it's every challenge, but I think the big one that you're going to see is pass interference. That is something that they try to get right in the CFL. And I don't think it's spot of the foul like it is in the NFL. I think in the CFL, it's a 15-yard penalty. But again, I could be wrong. That's just something to be aware of. If you get a big play from one of your receivers and then a challenge flag comes out and the receiver pushed off, that could be something that's being called back. So don't want to get excited about the stats until they're official. And then they have this thing called the Rouge, also known as the single. And I was talking to one of my friends who lives in Saskatchewan, and I was like, dude, what is this Rouge thing? And he's like, oh man, it's like this rule that they put in 100 years ago to try to add to the scoring. And basically the way that it works is if any punt goes unfielded into the end zone, or if the punt returner cannot bring the ball out past the plane of the end zone, the kicking team gets 1 point. So that's where you start to see some of the strategy is, if a punting team punts it into the end zone, does the defending team, return it and give up field position, or do they give up the point and get better field position? So it's a small difference. It's kind of cool for the real life game theory of CFL when they're trying to close out games, or if you have like a game where one team's down by 1 point, that's how they can get a point to tie the game. So it can get really crazy at the end of CFL games. It's really, really exciting. But you do get a point for your team defense if they do get a rouge or a single. But if you see a punt on Thursday and no one fields it, and all of a sudden a team gets an extra point, you're like, wait a second, did someone kick in? What's going on here? That's what it is. So some of what I'll call like the medium differences. So they have what's called an injured list versus the injured reserve in the NFL. So typically in the NFL, if someone opens a season on the injured reserve, they're not eligible to return until week 10. Or if during the season they go on the injured reserve, that's typically the end of their season. Well, in the CFL, they have a 1 game and a 6 game. And because the season's so long, the season starts this Thursday, and their Super Bowl, the Grey Cup, is the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. So this is going to go all the way into November. And so what they'll do is, like, if you have a running back, and let's say the running back gets a shoulder stinger, they'll immediately just put him on the 6-game injured list. And it's pretty much like the disabled list in baseball. Guys out for the next 6 games. Sometimes they have a 1 game if it's not that serious, but they do exercise a lot of caution in the CFL with their injuries. So that's the big difference there. It does result in a lot of roster movement, so it's not uncommon. Quarterbacks are pretty standard. Some of the quarterbacks are injury prone, but you see this a lot with like the running backs. If a running back gets hurt, it's next man up, and of course, just like in the NFL, the next man up running back is an opportunity for us to take advantage of a guy whose salary might be mispriced because now he's going to get a bigger workload. They don't use tight ends in the CFL. It's pretty much a non-existent position. They have fullbacks, but they utilize fullbacks pretty much as the NFL does, not very much. But yeah, there's no tight ends whatsoever. They might use a wide receiver in a formation or in a pass route similar to a tight end, but there's no official tight end in the CFL. So anybody in the backfield can move pre-snap. So there's no false starts in that sense. I don't even know if they have false start. I think if there is a false start, it's just offensive line related or snap related. But any of the receivers, so you'll see a receiver start like 15 yards back behind the line of scrimmage, and then just get a running head start. So it really, really opens it up for the passing game. It's harder to jam wide receivers in the CFL, and This is the most annoying thing in all of football, professional football. If you guys thought that running back vultures were bad in the NFL, wait till you get a taste of quarterback vultures in the CFL. I have nothing but good things to say about the CFL except for this. It is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So pretty much what they'll do is if a team gets on the 1-yard line, instead of punching it in with a quarterback sneak or handing it to the running back to get a 1-yard plunge, they'll bring in the backup quarterback who's just been holding a clipboard and wearing a headset and, under a jacket if it's cold. He will come in for one play and he'll try to do a quarterback sneak. It's so stupid. It's the dumbest thing. It's dumber. It's dumber than using randomness for your baseball lineups. It drives me insane because you're like pushing and you stack the team and they're working the ball up the field, and you got the running back, you got 2 of the receivers, you got the quarterback, and then they bring in this jabroni off the sidelines and he scores a touchdown and you just lost any points you were going to get. It's so frustrating. So some quarterbacks, like Mike Riley, who's like the stud of the CFL, he's a quarterback for the Lions, and he will stay in on quarterback sneaks. So that's something to pay attention to. But the quarterback vulture is the most tilting thing and maybe on all of DFS. It drives me insane. I wish they would get rid of it. Give the ball to the freaking running back. That's what he. Sorry, guys. It infuriates me to no end. I can't wait for you guys. I can't wait for you guys to experience. It's so much fun. So the last piece here of the medium differences is they have wide receivers that are traditional wide receivers, and then they also have wide receivers that line up in different areas of the backfield. They're called slot backs, and so it just depends on where they're going to line up. So this is a diagram of a CFL depth chart. So our red arrows here are our traditional wide receivers, our X and our Z that line up in the NFL. Again, you'll notice no tight end. You'll have one running back, the quarterback, and a fullback. Not every team utilizes the fullback, just like the NFL. But here are your slot backs. So these are the guys that are going to be moving around a lot pre-snap, moving all over the field. So you might have this guy, Tasker, start here and then come up here and spread out here. Or he might come over here and then run a wheel route behind this guy where this guy's running in. It's really, really intricate, some of the pass routes that they run. And then you'll also see here, one of the things that you get points for on DraftKings with the CFL is you actually get points for return yardage and return touchdowns. So if you see a guy like here, Brandon Banks, he's like the Tyreek Hill of the CFL. He also plays wide receiver. So you might have a game where Brandon Banks goes like absolutely nuts as a wide receiver and then adds like another 200 yards returning punts, maybe even get a touchdown. And then the super sneaky thing that you can do is you can stack Brandon Banks as one of your wide receivers and then put in the Tiger Cats as your defense. So if he scores a punt return touchdown, you got points for Brandon Banks, the player. You also get points for the defensive special teams touchdown with the Tiger Cats. So stacking defenses and players is something that you can do. I mean, it's rare for us to have the opportunity to do that in the NFL. There's a couple of guys worth playing in your NFL lineups that are going to return a punt return, that are also going to double up for your special team, but it's certainly something that you can go to with the CFL, especially since we only have 4 games to pick from. So we'll wrap up this section with some of the major differences. And this looks confusing. The more you watch, the more it'll make sense. Typically, these slot backs are going to be more involved than these guys. These are typically like your wide receiver 4s, your wide receiver 5s. They're going to usually be minimum price on DraftKings, 3,000 salaries. They might see 2 to 3 targets. So be careful if you're going to punt with one of these guys. You definitely want, in any offense, the quarterback, the running back, the 2 primary receivers, the X and the Z, and your 2 primary slot backs. That's where you're going to get your points. So the major difference that we have in the CFL from the NFL is in the NFL, we know that it takes 4 downs. You have 4 downs to get a first down. In the CFL, it's actually 3. So this is where you might hear a guy like Mike Lombardi talk about the New Orleans Saints. The thing that makes them so effective is they run a CFL offense. Drew Brees and Sean Payton, part of the reason they're consistently good is they're trying to get first downs on 2 instead of 3 downs, which sets them up in favorable positions. So in the CFL, they have 2 downs basically before they have to punt, and that can really, really sputter an offense. So it's not uncommon to see an offense start out with like 3 2-and-outs, and it can be really frustrating. But it's also nice too if an offense is clicking right away. It's just first down after score, and these offenses go on total heat checks. The CFL is it's pretty much like the NBA of CFL. It's very fast, high paced, high scoring. It's awesome. But because of this, it also limits the running game. There are very few bell cow running backs that just carry the ball. A lot of them are going to be dual threat guys. You don't see a lot of 3rd down running backs. You see a lot of 3 down running backs, guys that can play on all 3 downs and catch the ball just because of the nature of it being a pass-happy league. But that's not to say that you don't have your 3rd down running backs or your goal line running backs or whatever. And that's just going to come from the familiarity of getting to know the teams. And the cheat sheet that John put together will help with that. The other big difference is because there's only 4 games a week, unlike the 12 plus with the NFL, if you've never played some of the smaller slates with the NFL, it's going to be an adjustment for you, but it's also going to be awesome practice. You might have been too afraid to play like the afternoon slate or the primetime slate or whatever, but now that you're going to get some experience playing those slates with the CFL, it might be something to add to your arsenal, because it's very much like basketball, play all the slates, baseball, play all the slates. Same thing with CFL, I play all the slates. except Showdown. I don't play Showdown. I hate Showdown. So that was a ton to cover. I know we went a little bit longer than normal, but I just want to kind of give you guys the Cliff Notes versions of what's different. I'm sure I left some stuff out. The field's longer, the end zone's longer, it's wider. That's not that important. They covered that in the broadcast. I tried to cover the stuff that's applicable to DFS. So hope you guys are enjoying it so far. We'll hop into our our team comps next, and we'll keep you guys going, trying to get locked in on this.